Hello, Tarnished. I don't have relevant footage for this, but I really wanted to talk about it, so feel free to just put me in a background tab. In my previous video on being invaded, I put the intensity of my character on display by outright disregarding an invader's offer of an honorable duel and stabbing him in the back mercilessly like every rogue worth their salt has at least considered doing. That's part of my character. I will never let anyone bow to me. I will never allow anyone to do anything except come at me with the gravest of intents to kill, and if they let down their guard, I will make them pay for it. That's who I am. That's the kind of man Cassius is in the Lands Between. In this video though, I actually want to talk about the history of dueling, and why you may wish to actually embrace this offer sometimes, and what you stand to gain from it experientially, especially if you happen to be role-playing a character who would genuinely consider accepting such evenly matched trials. Bowing to offer a duel in From Software games is something whose existence I think everyone should know about, because it's essentially an example of emergent gameplay. It's a custom, a tradition that the player base developed for at least two separate but interconnected reasons, as a role-playing tool and to self-create a type of unofficial game mode that didn't truly exist, at least not for a very long time. Early From games whose collective DNA can be found inside today's release of Elden Ring didn't have any formalized method to do competitive multiplayer in a one-on-one format. What this meant is that an invader couldn't ever be sure if they would invade someone who was playing alone, or if their target host had allies to defend them. If they were flying solo, a bow was a role-playing tool that informed the opposing player this would be a serious fight with players usually matching each other's behavior, like if one healed so would the other, but if one abstained the other one wouldn't either, and so on. None of this was baked into the systems of the game itself, by the way. It was effectively a social contract among chosen undead. If they had teammates though, it wasn't just a role-playing tool, but a declaration of intent regarding the power balance of the encounter. Now obviously players who invaded a world in which they were outnumbered could simply choose to accept their disadvantages and embrace the idea that they would likely die to a host and their Blue Phantom's combined assault. But the way dueling developed organically in the player base is something with a very understandable motivation. In character, yes, I and Cassius might stomp on the idea of it, but outside of the immersion layer, outside of that in-character layer, as someone who thinks about game design and the way it becomes altered via collision with a player base, I can't stress enough what an interesting idea dueling actually is. From Software games have a very unique combat system. They have such a significant emphasis on spacing, timing, and understanding what possible actions the enemy can perform that one of the easiest lenses through which to grasp their vibe or compare them to is actually fighting games, like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, or Guilty Gear. Many of the same concepts in these games also surface in From Software games, but for the most part in a PvE environment. Most enemies either have so little health that a fight isn't sustainable for long enough to truly savor it, or they have so much health that the RPG framework is stressed a lot more. I believe this is actually part of why so many people's favorite fights in these games are ones like Artorias or Lady Maria. In addition to them being incredible characters with powerful stories and backgrounds, they're also humanoids that exist on a similar tension layer as the player. Now here's the thing. What if you could experience that incredible combat system with the same emphasis on spacing, footsies, timing, and understanding the enemy's capabilities, but against an opponent who is more or less a fair challenge, excepting Twinks, of course? Well then, you'd be able to truly experience From Software's various combat systems in a unique way that the rest of the game rarely gives you. Additionally, fighting a human player grants an immense amount of replay value to these games, not just because of the inherent freshness of fighting someone who has the same capacity for adaptation and reason as you, but also because it causes you to perceive the environments and look at the spaces, areas, and dungeons of these games in a totally different way. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that the desire for 1v1 combat in games like this was inevitable, but the in-game means to achieve that were not. Worse, the earlier inklings of this started long before games like For Honor were even a consideration. Even once For Honor released, it didn't really replicate the uniqueness of FromSoft PvP because Souls games typically offer a variety of builds and playstyles, and part of the tension of fighting enemy players was not knowing what you were even up against. You weren't fighting against a pre-canned character, you were fighting against someone who had full choice of how they would build themselves. The knowledge check in From games is absolutely massive, and as a result, invasions are also a good way to quickly see lots of different weapons or spells that you might not know about yet. This vast pool of knowledge is also what gives PvP combat a great degree of variety. All of this shapes up to basically be a very distinct kind of fighting game that nothing can really copy or re-express. Again, it's no wonder people wanted a more serious way to explore its intricacies. As far as I know, no one actually knows how this began or who was the first to start it. Many have made claims to have been the founders of dueling, but it's kind of hard to prove, and to my knowledge, it really emerged more or less spontaneously among various groups and players around the world at around the same-ish time. When an invader bowed, a player allied with the host or even the host themselves could accept the duel by bowing themselves while the others observed. Not only was this a more fair way for both sides to fight each other, it also provided a lot of watchable matches to the other players who were standing by. They weren't just limited to YouTube videos. Although seeing recordings from a host or invader's POV was obviously still the best way to enjoy and learn how to play competitively. Bowing to offer a duel was the player base's solution to the lack of formalized PvP, and rather than being enforced by game rules, it was, like much of the rest of the series' player-side community experience, something that just became. It became not because of imposition from the developers or because of ranked modes or anything of that nature, but simply because players wanted to fight other players in a very unique combat system that they couldn't really find anywhere else, while having the most rich 1v1 experience that was possible. Of course, this is accepting things like netcode, connection stability, the way different weapons and backstabs interacted with lag, and all of those other topics, because that would be another video, but the idea, the soul behind it, is something that, if you know me, you know I appreciate. I didn't engage with any of Dark Souls 3's online functionality whatsoever, so I have zero awareness of what that game's state of affairs is for PvP, but by the looks of it, and going by the items the game gives you, Elden Ring lets you explicitly summon a duelist to fight you, or opt to put down a summon sign as a duelist yourself. This to me is an amazing step that legitimizes the desire for 1v1 in a very real way in these games, and why I think it's a great time to introduce it now is twofold. First, Elden Ring is the most inherently unfair and imbalanced game in the series against the invader. This makes sense, because Miyazaki more or less intends them to lose, but it's such a harsh step to be outnumbered at least 90% of the time guaranteed. Second, Elden Ring is the most mainstream and popular game in FromSoft's portfolio by a wide margin. I mean, it's not even close to the others how much this specific game is in the awareness of not just the general gaming public, but the public in general. The increased size of the player base due to this popularity matters, because it affords these kind of split-off formats more smoothly without the usual matchmaking for invasions taking a significant hit. Dueling can be a good experience, for some players more than others, but if you don't know whether you are this kind of player, the best option for you is to just try it. If you get invaded or invade someone else, and you happen to be playing a character who would offer or accept such honorable battles, I do recommend you give them a try at least once or twice, so you can see what it feels like. There's a magical feeling there that I inadvertently buried in my previous video, but that was meant to exhibit the cold-blooded and ruthless pragmatism of a bloodcaster assassin of the Night Folk, and me as a player, not to invalidate an entire aspect of the player culture surrounding From Software games. I've mentioned at least twice already that Elden Ring has a unique combat system, certainly the most expansive and evolved one against Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1-3. Bloodborne and Sekiro are different experiences entirely, but as far as the type of game From have made more than any other is concerned, Elden Ring is effectively this combat system's most advanced form, with an immense amount of variety, options, possibilities, and even the chance to respec your character later in the game, which adds its own level of value to the experience, both PvE and PvP. If you're the kind of player who either really loves fighting in this game, really wants to experience maps and areas in a different way, or really wants to discover new types of weapons, spells, or strategies, many of which you can then take back into single player and apply against enemies and bosses, then you might actually really enjoy dueling. In my Elden Ring isn't about being a combat god video, I mentioned that you shouldn't let someone else's ideal way to play define yours, and I'm not exempt from that axiom. Just because I have a certain disposition toward invaders, just because myself and the character I embody would expel them from my world with the harshest fervor, doesn't mean you have to. I can inspire you, I can inform you, but you will have a more interesting gameplay experience in Elden Ring if you don't copy everything I choose to be. This applies to PvP and invasions as well. That's it for this video. Thank you for listening. I hope you find this information useful or found my thoughts interesting. Good luck in the lands between, and may the night keep you safe.